If you've ever read any of the reviews on the Cinescape Facebook page, you know I'm a big Star Trek fan. I've given in-depth reviews on all of the films thus far, as well as a reflection on my personal relationship with the franchise, but I haven't sat down and talked about how the franchise has progressed as a whole from one generation to the next. This will be a three-part review, though, because there's just too much to say about the entire franchise for one single review. In this review, I'll be covering the movies with the original series cast and giving my thoughts on each. This series began with Star Trek the Motion Picture and continued onward with Star Trek II The Wrath of Khan, Star Trek III The Search for Spock, Star Trek IV The Voyage Home, Star Trek V The Final Frontier, and finished up with Star Trek VI The Undiscovered Country. Star Trek The Motion Picture is a 1979 film directed by Robert Wise, famous for his works of West Side Story, The Sound of Music, and The Day the Earth Stood Still. The film stars William Shatner as the now Admiral James Kirk, Leonard Nimoy as Spock, DeForest Kelley as Leonard McCoy, James Doohan as Montgomery Scott, George Takei as Hikaru Sulu, Walter Koenig as Pavel Chekhov, Nichelle Nichols as Uhura, Majel Barrett as Christine Chappell, Persis Kambata as Ilea, and Stephen Collins as Willard Decker. The film begins with a blue energy cloud destroying 3 Klingon vessels and eventually a Starfleet outpost. From there, the film follows Admiral Kirk as he gets command of the newly refitted Enterprise from its captain, Willard Decker, and takes it to investigate the looming cloud and stop it before it reaches Earth. The motion picture is definitely not one of the better entries in the series. It's slow-paced and philosophical, but showcases some excellent special effects with miniatures and models that still look good today. It feels like an elongated episode of the original series, and that's because it actually was. Prior to the release of the film, Paramount was considering making another Star Trek series entitled Star Trek Phase 2. And it wasn't until the success of Star Wars that they decided they were going to make it into a feature film franchise instead. And what they did was just take one of the episodes and elongate it into a full-length feature film. It's as a result, there's a lot of dead space, dead time. It's so slow. It's often jokingly referred to as the slow motion picture, which is entirely accurate. I think it tries too hard to imitate 2001: A Space Odyssey. However, the special effects are great and they really hold up today. However, it's just slow and boring, and a lot of people skip it and just move right on to the second one. The motion picture was ultimately followed up by the phenomenal Wrath of Khan. Made with a smaller budget, the film was directed by Nicholas Meyer and sees our main cast returning, in addition to Kirstie Alley as the Vulcan Savick, Merritt Bertrick as Kirk's son David, Bibi Besh as Carol Marcus, Kirk's ex-lover from his younger days, and Ricardo Montalban returns as Khan Noonien Singh. The plot begins with Chekhov and the captain of the USS Reliant when they discover Khan marooned where he was left during the events of Space Seed, the original series episode. From there, he takes over the Reliant and uses it to seek out and destroy Admiral Kirk, whom he blames for his situation, and capture the Genesis device, a device that can reorganize matter to create life. Now, The Wrath of Khan is undoubtedly a masterpiece of a film. It has held up extraordinarily well over the years and is often regarded by some as the best Star Trek film. I mean, that's up for debate, but that's an argument for another time. Nicholas Meyer, who directed the film, decided to put more of an emphasis on the characters and their own struggles as opposed to just showcasing the special effects. And what we get is a tightly told tale of vengeance and dealing with age and ultimately death and sacrifice. I honestly don't know what else to say about it except that it's amazing. The Wrath of Khan, being the success that it was followed up by The Search for Spock, which marks Leonard Nimoy's feature film directorial debut. And wow, what a way to start! The film sees our main cast returning again, with the exception of Robin Curtis replacing Kirstie Alley as Saavik. Mark Leonard reprises his role as Sarek from the original series, and Christopher Lloyd stars as Kruge, the enemy Klingon commander. The plot picks up immediately after the events of The Wrath of Khan, with the crew reeling from the death of Spock, as well as David and Saavik exploring the Genesis planet. Kruge, a Klingon seeking to possess the secrets of Genesis, takes David and Saavik hostage. All the while, Kirk and company break McCoy out of a Federation prison after discovering he is carrying Spock's Katra, or soul, and they must return Spock's body and Katra to Vulcan. The entire plot builds up to a climactic showdown on the Genesis planet, and boy is it spectacular. Now, The Search for Spock is an odd-numbered Star Trek film, and if the history of the franchise has shown anything, it's that the odd-numbered ones tend to suck, but I really think this one transcends above that. It has some weird Vulcan mysticism in it that might be off-putting to some, but I really enjoyed it, and I find it fascinating. The action is great, the effects are great, there are a whole bunch of new ships and models that are introduced. The score is wonderful, the performances are good, and it takes on a much darker tone than the film before it. The Wrath of Khan ended on a very hopeful note, and this one begins and continues with a very bleak tone, which is very different than the film before it. But it still ends with that glimmer of hope, even though the characters have suffered through many trials and tribulations. And to me, that helps bring it above Star Trek the Motion Picture, and especially Star Trek V. The Search for Spock left a wide opening for a sequel, and we got an excellent one. Directed again by Leonard Nimoy, The Voyage Home picks up shortly after the events of the previous film, with the crew living in exile on Vulcan. They decide to return to Earth to face punishment for their crimes, unknowingly leaving as a huge probe is orbiting Earth, neutralizing starships and ravishing Earth's oceans, leaving Starfleet with no way of replying. In the old Klingon bird of prey, Kirk and crew realize it's trying to contact the species of humpback whale, although they're extinct at this point in the future. They slingshot around the sun to travel back in time, grab some humpback whales, and bring them into the future to save Earth from annihilation at the hands of the probe and nature itself. The Voyage Home is beloved by fans, and it's easy to see why. The Search for Spock had a very dark and bleak tone throughout the picture, whereas this plays it much more light-hearted with plenty of comedic moments throughout. It's Star Trek humor, though. It's not played like a straight-up comedy, so the humor doesn't come very jarring. However, it is, it's a fish-out-of-water situation, and I think a lot of the humor comes from that. It's also one of the few films where the crew is literally working against a ticking clock with the dissolving dilithium crystals in the Klingon bird of prey, which makes it very tight and gripping and interesting. And it's just wonderful. The crew is back together at the top of their game. It feels real good to have everybody back together again, and it feels very much like a quintessential Star Trek episode, much like City on the Edge of Forever, for instance, in that the crew ultimately learns a lesson from the adventure. and it hints at things in the universe that are simply beyond our understanding. Um, the conversation at the end of the film between the whales and the probe isn't subtitled, despite the producers pushing for it to be, because they really wanted to illustrate that there are things in this universe that we will never understand, and that's wonderful. It that whole thing is right at the end. The whole conclusion is just wonderful and gripping. You have this conversation happening that no one can decipher, and humanity is literally waiting in darkness, with their fingers crossed. And if that's not entertaining, I don't know what is. The Final Frontier followed up the Voyage Home, and boy did it suck. It was directed by William Shatner, and the plot follows the crew on the Enterprise A struggling to repair it following her maiden voyage. They are contacted by Starfleet in order to investigate a hostage situation on Nimbus 3, orchestrated by Spock, played wonderfully by Lawrence Luckinbill, who turns out to be Spock's half-brother. Spock is a renegade among Vulcans in that he embraces emotion instead of logic. When they arrive, the Enterprise is taken over by Spock and his followers, who commandeers the ship on a journey to the center of the universe to find God himself. Yeah, it's a weird one. The whole taking over the Enterprise and turning it towards some journey has been done in the past, so that's nothing new. But the model that they use for the ship in the feature films feels bigger. So I have a hard time buying that such a small group of goons from the surface is really going to take over the Enterprise. But anyway, the producers also were pushing for a much more lighthearted adventure, similar to the tone of the Voyage Home. But they didn't give the budget for it. Star Trek V had its budget slashed, and even ILM wasn't available to do the special effects, so what you end up with is a kind of flat looking film with really, really lazy special effects. William Shatner directed this, and he does seem to be able to pull off some interesting visuals. However, it ultimately just falls flat, and really the movie suffers as a result. The script is uninspired. They do try to do something different in that, the crew literally goes to the center of the universe in an effort to find God himself. But I think the main problem is that if you look at the promotional material for the film, it's billed as a big action adventure, and really it's not. I think it aims to be more in-depth and philosophical, like some episodes of the original series. However, it just fails. There's one thought-provoking moment, I think, in the entire film, where Kirk talks about how he needs his pain, which is really profound. Really, it was wonderfully written. The whole conversation is just beautiful, but it didn't save the movie as a whole. The whole movie as a whole just tanked, and as a result, that was the last Star Trek film for quite a while, with producers and Paramount deciding they wanted to focus on the Next Generation television series instead. The Undiscovered Country picks up years after the events of The Final Frontier, and was released to coincide with Star Trek's 25th anniversary. Nicholas Meyer returns to direct and brings back the entire original cast for one final outing, with the addition of Kim Cattrall as the Vulcan Valeris and Christopher Plummer as the villainous General Chang. The plot follows the original crew in the months before their retirement and begins with a spectacular explosion witnessed by the now Captain Sulu of the USS Excelsior. From there, the Federation and the Klingon Empire begin negotiating for peace. The Enterprise is sent to escort the Klingon representative, Chancellor Gorkon, played masterfully by David Warner, to Earth. But along the way, his ship is attacked and he is assassinated to prevent the peace talks. It is made to look as though the Enterprise is responsible, and Kirk and McCoy are framed for the assassination. From there, the crew has to figure out who is behind the plot and stop the assassins from plunging the entire quadrant into a war between the Federation and the Klingon Empire. Wow, this film is amazing. Nicholas Meyer once again proves he's one of the best directors around. And story-wise, it's very interesting as well, with its Cold War allegory and the metaphorical Berlin Wall coming down in space. The action is wonderful and beautifully executed. The directing is brilliant. And the score is dark and moody, which fits perfectly with the film's themes. The cast gives their all for one last performance, and the special effects are top-notch. ILM came back to do the effects, so you get an undeniably beautiful-looking film. The film literally starts with a bang and doesn't let up all the way through, playing out very much like a conspiracy thriller, which I think is what they were aiming for. And it was the perfect send-off for the original cast. I mean, at this point, their age was really beginning to show, and I guess they just wanted to pave the way for the next generation. All in all, the original series Star Trek films are wonderful. Sure, there's the odd-numbered ones, which tend to not be so good, but each of them has their own redeeming qualities. The films touched on each character and how they dealt with age and promotions, and really humanized them in a way we haven't seen since the original series was on TV. They are all grand in scale and presented us with wonderful adventures in the latter years of each character's lives, and was a wonderful send-off for the actors that are sadly no longer with us. While not perfect, these films have stood the test of time and still hold up really well today in terms of special effects and storytelling. I watched them a lot as a kid, and I still adore them now, even the not so good ones. But that's all I have to say about that. Stay tuned to this channel for the next installation of the Star Trek series, where we're going to cover the Next Generation films, and then part 3, where we're going to get into the Abrams verse, which will be interesting. So, this is Cinescape, signing off. Live long and prosper.